It definitely didn't fit in with the normal West Coast blues rock, you know, of Jefferson Airplane, Janis Joplin, Big Brother and the Holding Company, Quicksilver. It wasn't that folksy, it was something more inauthentic in a way about it, but they loved that idea of inauthenticity. What the early Alice Cooper band did was play. They played with music. They took it by its neck and shook it around, and that was one of the key things then that became very big with glam rock in the glam era.
I thought it was going to set the world on fire. Of course, it didn't quite do that, even though there are people out there that still claim that it's their favorite Alice Cooper album. And I do agree that it was our most original album. We were just so thrilled to have a stamp of legitimacy on our band. We were driving around LA selling the album out of the trunk of an old Cadillac Hearst that our managers had, and we would even see posters in the windows at Woolworths, you know, and we were like, wow, you know, this is incredible. We had a setback though, because Woolworths said, wait a minute, this cover, which was a painting that belonged to Frank, had a picture of a funeral, but there was a girl whose skirt was lifted up in the front so you could see her underwear. And Woolworths said, no, we can't have that. So they had to recall the album and put stickers over that part of the album cover, which actually seemed to give a bump in sales because, you know, teenagers got to see what's under that sticker.
With Pretties for You in the shops and attracting curious teenagers, the next release from Zappa's roster of artists was also issued on the Straight label, Trout Replica. After the Magic Band had finally mastered the intricate musical parts that made up the album's material, sessions had begun in March 1969 in their Woodland Hills house, Zappa attempting to capture the group as field recordings in their own environment. Yet although certain cuts from these did appear on the final album, Beefheart himself was unimpressed by the results and insisted upon studio time with engineer Dick Kunk. The eventual duration of the sessions made the quality of the finished album even more impressive.
Don came in one night and says, okay, I've talked Frank into giving us studio time. He's given us 6 hours to do all the basic tracks. And I'm going, you know, and most people would go, what? You know, because you'd have like a week, you know, you'd think. But I said, yeah, I think we can do that. And everybody kind of looked at me like, yeah. You know, I mean, let's get this thing over with.
When we went to the Whitney studio, Don and Frank were both there in the booth, and I don't know that it was booked to have just 8 hours or whatever that was. I don't know that. I know that's all we were there, or whatever that time is, you know, just a chunk of time. And that we had just a couple of false starts, maybe 2 takes on a couple of tunes. I can't remember that. But never 3, and I don't know how many were 2 takes that we maybe just stopped in the middle of a song or so. So it was all first take, second take, just doing the 20 or so tunes that were done in that session. Frank was pretty much, I didn't even notice him. It was all about Dick Kunk doing this, and Don walking around doing whatever he was doing. There wasn't, a couple of times there was something said, you know, I think, but almost nothing, just we're out there in that, you know, in that room and playing, you know, and just, oh man, we're being recorded, this costs money, oh no, I can't make any mistakes, and this shit's hard, damn it. And so it was like that. Frank, supposedly Don said, oh, Frank fell asleep at the board and all of those stories. I don't know, I was busy.
Released in June '68, Trout Replica was unlike any album that had come before it. A work that defied any attempts to categorize it. It was evidence that despite the financial hardships, the bullying and the unprecedented approach to composition, Van Vliert's musical vision was totally singular.
I don't think unique is a strong enough word for Trout Replica. It's way beyond that. So many things get called unique. It basically reinvented the wheel in terms of rock music. You know, all the parts were still there. The guitars, riffs, bass, drums, vocalist up front. But it was the way that it was all put together again. It was as if he'd seen this picture, this jigsaw of rock, jumbled it all up and then put all the pieces back together in a very oddly shaped way. But weirdly, it all made absolute sense, and that was the key. I think a lot of people, when they first heard it, just thought it was absolute noise, but if you listen carefully, I mean, it all is extremely meticulously worked out.
I saw you, baby, walking in your intriguing dress. I knew you under your dress. I knew you were under duress.
Beefheart seems to have cottoned on to a whole set of attitudes which were incubated in Europe in the 1920s. It's a Dada record. It's saying there is no point in having a culture which repeats what you already know. That culture should be something built that's truly unique, and that's what Trout Mask Replica is. And he wants to make something for which there is no preparatory listening. It has to be faced on its own terms. It's the project, really, of art since the Romantics, though whether or not it's ever been achieved by anyone except Captain Beefheart, I'm not sure. It's totally his own imprint, and it's the idea that if you have something that's completely personal, it doesn't communicate according to any codes that you've already learned, but it's beautiful because it's consistent.
I think they really swam against what they saw as mainstream culture, mainstream society. They were different. They came from the suburbs where the twitching neck curtains and the wife swapping and all that went on. And this is where you get sometimes the most creative cultural workers. And Trout Mask is almost the acme of that. You know, you don't get anything more out there. I mean, it eclipses anything that Zappa has ever done in terms of, you know, with most rock music, you can, or even new music, you sort of think, well, yes, that's brilliant. I wish I thought of that. But you could almost imagine it happening. With Trout Mask, you haven't got it. It's not in the brain. You hear it for the first time, you think, where did that come from? There's no other music like it.
The black paper between a mirror breaks my heart. The moon frayed through dark velvet lightly apart. Steal softly through sunshine. Steal softly through sunshine.
This was the moment when he found his voice, and it was Zappa signing him to Bizarre and saying, actually, you can do exactly what you want. And Beefheart didn't have a suited record company executive breathing down his neck. He really gave him the carte blanche to then put onto the musical canvas what was up here.
I did talk to Zappa quite a bit about this, and he said that this was really Beefheart's project, and he wanted to give him absolute carte blanche and let him do everything he wanted, and because, you know, he really wanted to see what would come out of it, because he'd been disappointed in the earlier Beefheart albums, and he thought this is going to be the great one. You know, this is the actual musical genius. It's going to be fully expressed, and I think it was, and I think many people feel that it was. It's just unfortunately it's not remotely commercial.
As much as the work was made possible through Zappa's hands-off approach, it was also fueled by rivalry. From the use of the piano to the highly complex compositions themselves, Beefheart had made a quantum leap with Trout Mask Replica, and it was in part due to musical one-upmanship.
Don was so ambitiously aggressive at trying to prove himself to Frank as a composer that he just basically threw the book at us. I mean, Trout Mask, I think I calculated one time that learning Trout Mask is like about, you know, it would be like learning 12 regular, normal commercial albums that came out at the time.
In a sense, it was Beefheart's riposte to Zappa's own earlier albums. It was very different from the previous stuff that Beefheart had done, and I think could definitely be seen as his competitive response to Zappa. You know, rather like the Beach Boys, you know, versus the Beatles. Each one tried to outdo each other every time. And had he continued it, of course, in that vein, I mean, it would have been astonishing. I mean, can you imagine what would have come out of it if, you know, Beefheart versus Zappa in a series of competing albums?
Competition, you know, you've got the Beatles and the Stones, you've got Bowie and Bolan in Britain later on, and I think the Zappa Beefheart one is particularly interesting. I mean, they both knew each other as schoolboys when they were obsessed with scatological jokes and doo-wop and R&B. But I think Beefheart had this primal, instinctive strangeness and attitude, whereas Zappa It was a lot more thought. It wasn't so instinctive. It was more intellectually rigorous. And I would say that would be one of the key differences. And they both had something the other character didn't have. I think Beefheart really just about won out. You know, I think he had something that you just couldn't be learned. And that's what makes Trout Mask such an extraordinary experience.
The LP would go on to raise Beefheart's profile as an American maverick, earning him the cover of Rolling Stone in May 1970, and over the years would regularly find a place on lists of the greatest albums of all time. Yet bewildered by the lengthy rehearsal period and the unhealthy environment of the house, the band members themselves had lost any sense of the significance of their work.
I don't think I was fully hearing the potential of that at the time. I was too busy playing it and hearing that. And it took years later for me to come back to it, because I was so close to it, to really enjoy certain parts and not like other parts, but to have a discerning thing with it. But I did not think that this was going to be this important thing. It was being sold to us very strongly by Don. But, you know, I didn't have that feeling at all, thinking it was going to be big and we were going to... No, I thought, God, I'm never going to get laid. I'm not going to get paid. No, you know, this is terrible.
It involves such total absorption of our time that we never thought about, what is this actually going to do when it gets out there? I mean, I never thought it would make money for me, and I was right about that. I thought, this is not going to make money. You can't go on, you're not going to go on the concert stage and have girls screaming, you know, in huge amounts of fan base. You're not going to have that kind of thing with this. This is something really different. The interesting thing is that Don used to say, and he was very right about this, he would say, you guys watch. This thing is going to take off. This thing is going to make such an impression on the world. You will not believe it. People will be looking you up years after this is done and asking you questions about it. Well, what's going on right now?
With Beefheart's masterpiece and Alice Cooper's debut now in the stores, the Straight label was fully up and running. Yet for the other artists on Zappa's roster, there had been significant delays. With the Mothers on the road, the GTOs' time in the studio had been held back, while Easy Chair had been wasting away since the Shrine Exposition Christmas show. Having completed a number of compositions for a potential debut, the period of inactivity had taken its toll on the band, and they slowly dissolved.
We estimated something was going to happen, but what really happened is the ennui of living at the Tropicana Motor Hotel, and, you know, we had some great times and stuff, and we were sitting there waiting to do something, and that's what sort of promoted the fact that these guys sort of just kind of, you know, went to the winds there. So we did that gig, and really not much else. Just kind of, we were on retainer or something, and they were trying to figure out something for us to do. But by the time that happened, it was just me.
Very much aware that Simmons was still on the books, it was Herb Cohen who found the now solo artist a project to get his teeth into. The Roger Corman production Naked Angels was a low-budget outlaw biker film in need of a soundtrack, and Cohen passed the job to Simmons. Easy Chair's drummer was brought back on board, and seasoned songwriter and session musician Randy Sterling was hired to oversee the recordings. The finished album was released by Straight in September 1969.
Herb gave us something to do, which was the Naked Angels thing, where he brought in a fellow named Randy who had been in one of his groups prior to that and played with Gabor Szabo, I found out later.